In the first 3 episodes of this series, we followed the historic Carpentersville to Yorkville trolley system, traveling by bicycle, automobile, and foot from Carpentersville in North Kane County through West Dundee, next passing through the extensive street railway system of Elgin, through South Elgin, visiting the Fox River Trolley Museum, and ending up crossing the Fox River back to its east bank at 5 Islands in North St Charles Township.
In Part 4 of this Fox River Trolley series, we will continue the journey south, this time covering more than 5 miles of the traction system's route, through the bucolic terrain of North St Charles Township, then into and through the city of St Charles, exploring the community's rich history and its relation to both the Fox River Trolley system and the 3rd Rail Division of the Aurora, Elgin, and Chicago Railroad.
Departing the 5 Island stop on the east bank of the Fox River, we head south along what is today the Fox River Trail. Along this trail were multiple Fox River resort areas serviced by the trolley system. To our right was the Villa Maria Retreat, originally the property of Reverend Hugh McGuire, a Chicago Roman Catholic priest. The estate became a vacation home for the Sisters of Mercy following his death in 1911. Then in the late 1960s, the nuns converted the estate into a Roman Catholic retreat, which they ran for a few decades before selling the land to the Kane County Forest Preserve in 1990. Today it is the Tekakwitha Woods Forest Preserve, named for a young Mohawk woman in New York State who converted to Christianity in the 1670s and was canonized as a Roman Catholic saint centuries later in 2012.
The Fox River Trail segues into Weber Drive as we pass over Villa Maria Road. We travel along this quiet road for about 1 mile, where 4 more stops await us. The midway siding was near the intersection of James Drive and Weber Drive. Peterson's stop, number 45, was a 1/3 of a mile further. While Dunham Road stop was a little more than 1,000 feet south beyond this, near Pearson Drive. About 1,000 feet further was the Pinelands stop, number 44. Here to our right was the Pinelands Resort. Originally the Wing Hanmer summer camp in the early 1910s, the park became the Pinelands Resort in the early 1920s, when a dance hall was built, which featured top Chicago bands. Once a popular destination, the resort met its demise as a casualty of the Great Depression. The Pinelands Dance Hall has since been converted into a residence and is today private property.
Departing Pinelands, back on the Fox River Trail, we ride under the Red Gate Road Viaduct, where we pass Stop 45, the Oak Ridge Stop, another camping and picnic resort that later added a dance hall and pavilion. and which lasted into the early 1940s. The trail then becomes Grove Road, today a scenic waterfront neighborhood. Another 1,000 feet or so brings us back to the Fox River Trail, where Tanner Siding, stop number 42, was situated. We ride along the east bank of the Fox for another 1,000 feet or so, through Anderson Woods Forest Preserve, until the trail starts to veer off to the right, to the west, towards the Fox River. Originally, however, the trolley line kept going directly south, and you can still see the line of utility poles that betray its original route. As this path is now privately owned, we'll need to fly a drone over the property to continue our journey.
As mentioned earlier, the utility poles point the way, and we initially fly over Stop 41, the Alta Vista Lodge stop, what was formerly a country estate for the Wesley H. Atkinson family and then the Robert F. Engel family, later a lodge as part of the St. Charles Country Club. But then we come to the edge of a large, sprawling campus. This is the Q Center, a conference center and hotel, with accommodation for 1,000 conference participants, situated on 95 acres of scenic Fox River landscape. Formerly the Arthur Anderson Center for Professional Education, the campus was built in the latter part of the 20th century, long after the traction line was abandoned. But the parking lot and Bill Barth Drive roughly follow the path of the former trolley system.
The next trolley station was located just beyond the roundabout, near the campus entrance, the St. Charles Country Club stop. This served the golf club, located several hundred feet east along North 5th Avenue, also known as Illinois Route 25. A little more than 1,000 feet further south, the trolley line converged with 5th Avenue, just about where the St. Charles Cemetery is located, and where was situated our next trolley destination, the St. Charles Cemetery stop, number 40.
Back on our bicycles, we ride south along 5th Avenue. Entering the northern limits of St. Charles City, the stops became more frequent, about every block or two. At the south edge of the cemetery was Swaby's stop, so named for Swaby's greenhouse and flower shop standing to our left. We then ride by 3 more stops: Allen's Lane stop, the obscure stop number 37, and the North Avenue stop, although not Route 64 North Avenue.
The next few stops after these, the Park Avenue stop and the State Street stop, served Pottawatomie Park, several hundred feet to the west. Pottawatomie Park officially opened as a St. Charles City Park in 1912, although it had been a private park and resort area for a few decades prior. In fact, the Chicago Great Western Railroad had been owner of the bucolic refuge since 1889, when it formed the St. Charles Hotel and Park Company. At a time when the Chicago Great Western competed aggressively for passenger traffic, they had plans for a hotel and resort along the Fox River, as a destination for travelers from the east and the west.
We next pass over the Fifth Avenue Viaduct, a bridge built by the trolley system to pass over the Chicago Great Western tracks running east and west. This bridge was long the source of local controversy, as it was frequently cited as being in need of repair and featured a dangerous humpback design, reducing visibility from the north and south sides of the bridge. A short distance south of this bridge was the State Avenue stop. In addition to serving Potawatomi Park, passengers would interchange here for the Chicago Great Western Railroad, as the passenger depot stood just a few blocks to the east. A little more than 500 feet further south brings us into the commercial district of historic St. Charles, Kane County, Illinois, to the city's main street, also known as North Avenue, Illinois Route 64.
The city of St. Charles has one of the longer pedigrees of the Fox River communities in Illinois, with U.S. colonists arriving in the 1830s. But long before that, as with many places along the Fox River in Illinois, the area was home to indigenous people for thousands of years. Indeed, the St. Charles History Museum holds a large number of Native American artifacts collected in the vicinity of St. Charles, which tell 1,000 tales of people living here, from the Archaic period through post-contact periods, with Potawatomi settlements dotting its shores into historic times. Native American burial mounds, a few of which have remarkably survived to the present, 1,000 to 2,000 years old, lie just a mile to the north of the city center. And you can learn more about those from our St. Charles Mound series, published a few years ago.
The city of St. Charles proudly displays its Native American heritage with a bronze statue placed on the east bank of the river, to the south of the former Chicago Great Western Bridge and Potawatomi Park. The 15-foot-tall statue, installed in 1988, sculpted by local artist Guy Belaver, is named Equabet, meaning watching over, in the language of the Neshnabek, the people of the valley, the Potawatomi.
St. Charles was originally called Charleston and appears on the earliest survey maps of the area from 1840. By the time this map was drawn, the settlement was already a going concern. The settlement's first school and blacksmith shop were opened in 1835. Their first general store was built in 1836, as well as an 18-foot-wide bridge to tame the Fox River, and a sawmill to tap the river's power. A cloth dressing mill was built in 1837, and a brick-making factory in 1838. Horace Bancroft, the local blacksmith, applied for a U.S. post office in 1837, but had to change its name to St. Charles, as there was already a Charleston post office registered in central Illinois. The town was platted that same year and officially changed its name to St. Charles to align with the post office in 1839.
The early 1840s saw additional mills, factories, and foundries built, all leveraging the power of the Fox River. Multiple brick buildings went up along Main Street on the east side of the river, while a few wood-frame general stores were added on the west side. A newspaper was soon established, and then a medical college was founded on the east side of town, led by Dr. George W. Richards. However, this institution led to one of St. Charles' darkest chapters in 1849, with body snatching and ensuing street riots. We documented this chain of unfortunate yet fascinating events in a video published last year.
Nonetheless, the St. Charles settlement continued to grow, likely due to its advantageous position along the Fox River, with multiple trails leading from cities to the east and west, and with rumors of railroads entering the area. Prior to 1850, the village council was approached by a fledgling railroad, the Galena and Chicago Union, which intended to build a railway from Chicago to Galena, then one of the largest cities in Illinois, and sought to build it through St. Charles. Perhaps distracted by the events of 1849, or perhaps hoping for a better offer, St. Charles surprisingly turned them down, and the new railroad instead routed through Elgin, later becoming the Chicago and Northwestern. This would not be the river town's last railway misstep.
Just a few years later, in 1853, perhaps to undo their earlier error, the Chicago, St. Charles, and Mississippi Airline was launched, primarily driven by St. Charles businessman Ira Menard, and funded by many St. Charles residents. The new railroad intended to build a direct line, hence airline, from Chicago to Savannah, Illinois along the Mississippi, directly through St. Charles. With optimism, they started building the new road, even constructing the masonry piers and abutments for a bridge over the Fox River to the north of Main Street. Sadly, this venture went bust within a few years, leaving the masonry piers standing unfulfilled in the Fox River. 30 years passed before the Minnesota and Northwestern, Stickney's last great venture, seized the opportunity of reusing much of the airline's right-of-way through St. Charles, including the partially completed bridge, building what was to become the Chicago Great Western in the late 1880s.
Although there had been attempts to incorporate years earlier, the town did not officially incorporate until February 12, 1853, with an act approved by the Illinois State Legislature. That same year, to add to its growing respectability, a new bank was established on West Main Street, bringing with it capital and investment. The new town built two new substantial public schools in the mid-1850s, one on the west side and an even larger facility on the east side, costing a total of $21,000, or about $2.3 million in today's money.
By 1860, the population of the town had reached 1,800 residents, and the community was generally thriving. But in 1866, a great fire destroyed one of the town's paper mills, which gave employment to nearly 100 residents. The ruins of the mill stood for decades along the west bank of the river and was never rebuilt. The loss of this business, along with the absence of a railroad, dampened the town's prospects. But in 1870, the town council convinced the Chicago and Northwestern to build a 2.5-mile spur from their Chicago to Geneva line up the west side of the Fox River at a cost of $44,000, of which $35,000 was paid for by the town of St. Charles. Completed in January of 1871, the spur finally gave residents and local industry access to wider markets, although limited to a few trains per day.
In 1874, the town council extended their investment further with the construction of a substantial Main Street bridge, made of iron, to replace the wooden bridge, which itself had been replaced a few times since the original bridge of 1836. This new bridge cost the city more than $10,000, the equivalent of $650,000 today. And this, along with the earlier investment in the railroad, necessitated the selling of municipal bonds. Becoming a city in 1875, the community saw modest growth in the subsequent few decades, reaching 2,700 inhabitants by 1900.
And this was about the time that the Fox River trolley system enters the picture. As we have described in previous episodes, in 1895 and 1896, the Carpentersville, Elgin, and Aurora Railroad sought to build a railroad from Carpentersville south to Geneva, in hopes of meeting up with the Aurora, Batavia, and Geneva Electric Railway, building northward from Aurora, with the ultimate goal of creating a 40-mile-long electric trolley system from Carpentersville to Yorkville, along the Fox River in Illinois. As the CE&A moved southward in the latter months of 1895, they negotiated a street railroad franchise with St. Charles, initially proposing a completion date of March 1, 1896. but later amending that to July 1st, with a $1,000 forfeiture penalty. By December, the railroad had acquired the rights to use Fifth Avenue as access to St. Charles from the north.
In April of 1896, the St. Charles City Council bestowed the CE&A with a 25-year franchise, as well as laying out the rules for operation through the city, including a fare rate of no more than 5 cents from any one part of the city to another, a speed limit of 10 miles per hour between 5th Avenue and 3rd Street along Main Street, and a 30-mile-per-hour speed limit elsewhere in St. Charles. Cars required to run 7 days per week, and trackage not to be used for freight, with the exception of U.S. mail and packages.
Early on, bad weather inhibited progress of the electric road construction, but by the middle of May, railroad ties were distributed all along the proposed city route, in preparation for the railroad labor gangs. 1 month later, with only a few weeks for the July 1st deadline, St. Charles Main Street was completely torn up with grading and the laying of ties and rails on both sides of the river and along the 1874 Iron Bridge. Within 10 days, in late June, work gangs were placing the electric poles for overhead wiring along the route and used dynamite to blast out the post holes, shattering windows and otherwise unsettling the neighborhood.
With little time to spare, the new road was completed within hours of the franchise deadline, with infrastructure cobbled together at the last moment to make things work. On a wing and a prayer, the first run of the new electric line started out from Elgin at 4 p.m. on Tuesday, June 30th, with railroad officers and local dignitaries as passengers. The trip from Elgin to Coleman only took 15 minutes, an auspicious start. But here the travelers were delayed by about an hour, as a construction train hauling gravel ballast was impeding the path forward. Once the track was cleared, they made the journey from Coleman to St. Charles, and then to Geneva within 35 minutes, including a stop in St. Charles, arriving in Geneva at 5:50 p.m. Initially, onlookers witnessing the first trip through St. Charles and Geneva were enthralled, if not a little surprised by the sight of the trolley car shuttling through the city.
But as the news spread throughout these communities, the return trip, departing from Geneva and passing again through St. Charles, garnered much attention and enthusiasm. By now, the streets were lined with people, watching in appreciation and wonder, as the elegant trolley carriage moved quietly through the streets, save the clickety-clack of the wheels, and powered by an invisible electric force. Residents were said to have waved their handkerchiefs and cheered energetically in appreciation of the passing car. Some women tossed bouquets of flowers to the car passengers. As the train car passed east over the Main Street Bridge, the St. Charles Electric Light Plant at the southwest corner of Cedar and East 1st Street sounded their whistle, while a steam launch in the Fox River tooted a salute of their own.
Indeed, it was something of an early 4th of July parade, as the train car held both railroad management as well as a few of the good and the great of the Fox River communities. Mary and Isabel Miller, daughter of St. Charles attorney Charles A. Miller, was one of the fortunate inaugural riders, the first woman to ride an electric train in the city of St. Charles. Ms. Miller went on to become a notable artist in ensuing years, with her work displayed in galleries on the U.S. East Coast.
On the return trip, the inaugural trolley car reached the Elgin City Center at about 7:20 p.m., with the passengers extremely satisfied with the excursion. The CE&A had met the July 1st deadline, with no major problems, and with a few hours to spare, saving themselves the expense of the $1,000 penalty. Given how the tracks and wiring had been so hastily cobbled together, the construction company required a few more weeks until mid-July to complete the ballasting of the trackway and to tie up loose ends, before full traffic could run on the railroad.
St. Charles now had 3 railroads, albeit the Chicago and Northwestern was a spur. But with the Chicago Great Western providing intercity access to St. Charles, and the Elgin, Aurora, and Southern Traction providing a conduit through the city, as well as quick travel along the Fox River, things were looking up. So much so that in 1900, a major new industry arrived in the city, in the form of the Cable Piano Company, which aimed to leverage these railroads and build a large factory on 11 acres of land on the west bank of the Fox River, along West 1st Street. The company was one of the USA's largest manufacturers of pianos and reed organs at that time, and employed on the order of 500 people, including many women providing skilled labor.
Thereafter, a steady flow of passengers rode the trolley between stops in St. Charles, as well as from city to city. And as the Elgin, Aurora, and Southern Traction began to use heavier rolling stock, concerns rose as to the additional weight bearing on the 1874 iron bridge spanning the Fox River at Main Street. Much of this concern came from the railroad engineers, who brought their unease to the St. Charles City Council in the spring of 1902. The railroad offered the city two generous options. One, to pay the lion's share for a new, more substantial bridge, which would accommodate both trolley traffic as well as wagons and foot traffic. Or two, to build and pay completely for a separate bridge for the exclusive use of train traffic to the north of the 1874 bridge. The City Council favored the second option as it was cheaper, although general public sentiment was more in favor of a single new bridge.
However, before the Elgin, Aurora, and Southern Traction could begin construction of the new trolley bridge, on mid-morning of Wednesday, July 2nd, while a trolley car passed slowly over the Main Street Bridge from west to east, the bridge collapsed under the weight of the vehicle, with the back end of the trolley car falling several feet and coming to rest against one of the piers. There were about 30 passengers on the train, mostly women, plus the motorman and the conductor, and several were badly injured in the accident, although none critically.
Now the St. Charles City Council had an even bigger problem, a broken and collapsed Main Street Bridge. But by August 1st, the EA and ST agreed to build a new Main Street Bridge for both general traffic and trolley cars, with a construction estimate of $26,000, at a cost of only $12,000 to the city. Furthermore, they would immediately build a temporary bridge to enable general traffic and the trains to continue running at no extra cost.
The railroad moved quickly, hiring laborers at $1.75 per day, about $6 per hour today, most said to be Greek immigrants, and boarding them near the worksite in tents. The old bridge was torn down and removed, and a new temporary bridge was completed by the end of September. Then, before the snow flew, less than 3 months later, a new concrete and iron bridge of functional design, 56 feet wide with 8-foot sidewalks to the north and south, a 300-foot span, supported by 3 sets of piers and 2 abutments, was completed by mid-December 1902.
Citizens of St. Charles were generally pleased with the new Main Street Bridge and the trolley system's service, but they grumbled frequently through the early 1900s regarding the lack of a proper station building or waiting room, especially during the cold winter months. Like most places along the trolley route, passengers street-boarded onto trains, while tickets could be purchased at a local storefront. Nonetheless, they complained that St. Charles was being neglected by the railroad.
In late 1908 and early 1909, a new electric railroad, or at least a new subsidiary of the Aurora Elgin and Chicago, the Chicago Wheaton and Western, made waves along the Fox River when it announced that it would be building a feeder branch off of the AE&C's Elgin line, extending to DeKalb, more than 30 miles to the west. The AE&C negotiated with both Geneva and St. Charles for railroad franchise rights, playing them off each other. Each of the two cities, in turn, attempted to extract as much from the railroads as possible in terms of infrastructure and other concessions.
Ultimately, the city of Geneva won out, and the AE&C's feeder branch was built from Pleasant Hill near Winfield through West Chicago to Geneva, along the AE&C's Elgin branch, although the new line quickly abandoned any notion of extending to DeKalb. The AE&C offered something of an olive branch to St. Charles by extending the Geneva branch from Geneva to St. Charles via their Elgin, Aurora, and Southern Traction line.
By 1920, St. Charles was hovering at 4,000 residents, and newfangled automobiles, now being mass-produced at affordable prices between $250 to $350 apiece, began to appear with increasing frequency on area roads. This triggered a profound change to the St. Charles community, as a direct and paved route from Chicago was soon created from a collection of former dirt and gravel roads, that being Illinois Route 64, also known as North Avenue. Suddenly, a new conduit for freight, goods, and passenger traffic was opened up to the community.
From Fifth Avenue, we turn right onto Illinois Route 64, also known as North Avenue. The trolley ran through the middle of this road, down grade, towards the Fox River, and into the heart of St. Charles. There would have been trolley stops at virtually every street block through the city, with street boarding. There was also a siding on the east side of the river. Initially, it stood a short distance east of the river, then later moved to a few blocks east. This siding was where the 3rd Rail Division cars from the Geneva branch would make their final stop before starting back on their return journey to Geneva and then to Wheaton and Chicago.
As we approach Riverside Drive, the Arcada Theater stands prominent to our left. Built in 1926 by Lester Norris at a cost of $500,000, or about $7.7 million in today's money, this would have been a popular stop in central St. Charles. A bit further west brings us past the iconic St. Charles Municipal Building, built in 1940, designed with an Art Moderna aesthetic by Roscoe Harold Zook, who also designed the Pickwick Theater in Park Ridge. Although it was built a few years after the closure of the trolley system in St. Charles, a small room on the first floor was used by the CA&E as a waiting room for their bus service to Lakewood in West Chicago.
Passing over the Main Street Bridge, we find that the 1902 EA and ST bridge is no longer with us. The bridge that we see today is a rebuilt and upgraded version of a bridge built in 1928, when the 1902 bridge was widened to nearly 80 feet to accommodate the larger width of the new Illinois Route 64. The most recent renovation, completed in 1998 by the Illinois Department of Transportation, resonates with the 1928 bridge design, but incorporates some subtle changes. For example, notice how the angular face of the piers echoes the municipal tower in the background. The 4 copper canopied gazebos were also a nice touch by the St. Charles city government.
Just over the river to our right is Hotel Baker, built in 1928 by Edward J. Baker, of Spanish Revival design, at a cost of $600,000, or more than $8.5 million in today's money. Like the Arcada Theater built a few years prior, these buildings and enterprises appear on the scene coincident with the creation of Illinois Route 64. But this too was a popular destination for passengers aboard the trolley system. Renovated in 1993, this building is also on the National Register of Historic Places.
The trolley then traveled upgrade between 2nd and 3rd Streets, ascending out of the Fox River Valley. This city block was known locally and infamously as Whiskey Bend, owing to the number of saloons and taverns lining the street at the turn of the 19th century. For decades, the trolley would conveniently drop off and pick up Bacchanalians along this stretch of Main Street. At 3rd Street, the trolley turned left, heading south. A few blocks south of Main Street at Illinois Street brings us past the former Howard House Hotel to our right. This establishment played a role in the infamous Resurrectionist riot of 1849, long before the trolley system arrived.
St. Charles continued to grow, albeit slowly, and by 1930 had a population of about 5,400 residents. By this time, the trolley system had become the Aurora Elgin and Fox River Electric, having split off from the CA&E Third Rail in the early 1920s, as a result of the AE&Cs going into receivership in 1919. The new company introduced a new line of streetcars, built by the St. Louis Car Company in 1923, with an orange and yellow color motif. The different cars and colors helped passengers easily distinguish between the AE and FRE cars and the CA&E cars on the streets of St. Charles. The Fox Valley region suffered through the Great Depression, as did all communities in the U.S. The times were indeed difficult. In 1934, AE and FRE motormen and conductors were being paid between 51 and 52 cents per hour, or about $6 to $6.25 per hour in today's money, hardly enough to support a family.
Between mid-1934 and mid-1935, buses replaced the Elgin and Aurora streetcars, as well as the interurban cars that traversed north and south. Aurora Elgin and Fox River electric trackage was being actively torn up or paved over, while overhead trolley power lines were disabled and removed. However, the line that ran through St. Charles, at least, from Geneva to Main Street and then east over the river, continued on for at least a few more years, as this was part of the Geneva branch of the CA&E, which was still in operation.
In 1937, the CA&E decided to shut down the Geneva branch due to declining patronage, as well as an inadequate power infrastructure. Apparently, by now they were unable to operate more than one car at a time on the feeder branch. CA&E service was officially discontinued on October 31, 1937, removing one of the final remaining pieces of the Fox River trolley system, that being between Geneva State Street, Illinois Route 38, and St. Charles Main Street, Illinois Route 64. As a replacement, the CA&E offered motor coach service from St. Charles to the CA&E's Lakewood station on its Elgin line in West Chicago, along Illinois Route 64.
More than 2 decades later, in 1960, with a population north of 9,000 residents, and with the trolley system long gone, St. Charles began to take shape in its modern form, and devoid of all railroads. The Chicago and Northwestern train depot, long closed down, which stood along 1st Street West between Walnut and Illinois Streets, was raised in November of 1962, as the St. Charles Fire Department used the structure for firefighting practice. The Chicago Great Western Depot in the northeast corner of town, near 9th Avenue, midway between State and Cedar Avenues, held on for a few more decades. The station continued freight operations until the early 1980s, before it too was finally demolished in the mid-1980s.
In the ensuing years, St. Charles continued on a growth trajectory, reaching nearly 28,000 residents by the year 2000, and rising to more than 33,000 inhabitants in 2020. The city's motto, coined in 1969, continues to be Pride of the Fox. Like all of the communities along the river, St. Charles seeks to balance growth with quality of life, embracing the modern while retaining its historic roots. Today, the city's largest employers include the St. Charles Community School District, R.R. Donnelly & Sons, Omron Automotive, and Armour Eckridge Meats.
On the final leg of our journey through St. Charles, on the Fox River Trolley system, beyond Prairie Street, we pass along a relatively quiet residential boulevard, again sufficiently wide for a trolley line. Here a siding was located between Bowman and Cutler Streets. Beyond this, there were trolley stops at every street block. At Mosedale, Horn, McKinley, Fellows, and finally at Gray Street, the southern limit of St. Charles and the northern edge of Geneva. And it is here that we will end this segment of our Fox River Trolley journey. In our next episode, we will take up the Elgin, Aurora, and Southern Traction story as it passed through historic Geneva.
As always, many thanks to our Be Historic channel community, our subscribers, our Super Thanks contributors, and our generous Patreon supporters. We'd also like to thank the St. Charles History Museum, with a special shout out to local historian Steve Gibson. If you're enjoying these videos, please remember to like, subscribe, comment, and share. And if you're so inclined, consider supporting our channel via Patreon. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you, in a manner of speaking, in our next video adventure.